Beautiful.
So Chip, you had a bad day. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm all zoomed out. There used to be, wasn't there a song? There was a song, Who's Zooming Who? I mean, like, we're all
hate
zooming
Zoom.
each other. I feel like
Ah.
we're Zoom sluts. I mean, I'm sort of tired. I like the medium on some level, and then on another level today was just too much Zoom. And then yesterday, I'm still involved with Airbnb. Airbnb had to lay off 25% of its workforce. So I have a ton of people who are my mentees, or actually we're sort of mentorns together. I'm a mentor and an intern with them. I learn from them, they learn from me. And a lot of people lost their jobs. So I've been consoling people. So yeah, how about you? How was your day? In Park City, right? You're in Park City still?
Yeah. I'm still, I'm at 8,000 feet. I had a baby squirrel come and visit today. Super
wow.
cool. And the ducks are about to produce ducklings, so I'm psyched about that.
How are your toes? How are your toes?
Oh, my fucking toes, man. So you want to hear the toe story? All right.
Yes.
So this is what happens, right? I've got this really important client Zoom call on Friday, and I'm like doing my thing, and my wife comes over to me, freaked out, holding her phone, and she's like, oh, and she's pointing to a picture of what's on the cover of the New York Times, which is something called COVID toe. And so, right, it's just like fun to say, COVID toe. So what happens was, like 3 weeks ago, I'm up here and all my toes get like really red and they're very irritated. Like I can't sleep at night. I've got to wrap them all in little bandages so that I can sleep at night. And I thought, well, maybe it's just because like I'm up at this altitude, my feet have swollen, my shoes and feet don't get along so well anymore. And, so they, about a week later, 10 days later, it just goes away. And I think, well, that was weird, whatever that was. And then I see the picture of my toes on the front of the paper. So apparently I've had COVID and I'm asymptomatic except for my toes. Although, I went this weekend and I got the thing up the nose test, which is like
So
horrible.
What is that like? The thing up the nose?
Oh, dude. Oh, it's terrible, man. So the thing is about this long and I've got a big nose, right? So it goes like up my nose, into the septum, like into the back of your brain, and they like kind of wipe it around. And it's not just for a second, it's 10 seconds of like scrubby. And it's just like, I get the thing out of my head. But the good news is I'm not infectious. So like whatever.
Wow. Well, thank God, because otherwise we would cancel you right now because who knew?
Do I need a mask?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
No. Okay. Zoom. We don't need that. All right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's scary though. Were you scared?
I was more scared when my toes were all freaked out. And I thought, what is this bizarre thing? Like it feels like there was snow here when this was going on. And so at night I would go out and I would like put my feet into the snow to try and get them to calm down.
Oh
my
gosh.
It feels like your toes are on fire. And then it just goes away.
Listen,
and of course everybody asks, they're like, you took pictures of your toes, right? And it's like, well, why would I take pictures of my toes?
We need like a warning at the start of this show today. Like if you're hypochondriac, please do not watch this show today because now everybody's going to be looking at their toes. My toes are fine, so I feel good about that.
Believe me, if you would know,
really?
There would be no question. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm glad you're fine. I'm glad you're asymptomatic. I'm glad but here's the weird part. And this is, I have a blog post tomorrow coming out on my Wisdom Well blog. And the title is, Who Invited Uncertainty to Dinner? And the whole premise is like, every single day is like some new theory or some new point of view, hypothesis about this disease and about when we're going to reopen or when it's safe to reopen and what's going to happen in terms of being able to test for the virus. And I want certainty in my life, but as you said to me a few minutes ago,
you've never had certainty, Chip.
I know.
It's always been an illusion.
I know. Thank you. You are my teacher. Thank you, David. Let me introduce our guest for today because really proud to have her here. So thanks, David. let me actually start by going back to 2 sessions ago. So we had Alex last session. My gosh, he was just a wonderful guest. He's the kind of person I'm looking forward to spending more time with. But 2 sessions ago, it was just you and me, David. And oh my God, we had so many chats. We had a chat mania going on. And we asked a question of like, what do we call ourselves? Like, what's the word that could define us in this age, whether we're in our late 40s, in our 50s, our 60s, maybe our 70s. And how do we define what it means to be an active midlifer? Here are some of the responses we got from people. I'm a peaker. I'm a hipster. I'm a peakster. I'm an unbroken hipster. Like, I think that was just the same person going over and over and like having way too much to drink. I'm a badass. I'm a third stager. I'm a midlife matters. I'm the spirited ones. I'm 45 degrees. I have no idea what that means. It sounds like you're sick if you are 45 degrees. I'm a modern elder. I have a certain affection for that one. I'm a midlife magnificence. I'm a zoomer boomer. I'm a young elder. I'm a yelder. That sounds like a dog, like old yeller. I'm an active ager, and a few others. What's so funny about this is that David and I, in the early days of us getting to know each other, we're both like, what the hell do we call each other or ourselves? And I don't think anybody's come up with it yet. Although I actually sort of like perennials. Perennials is not bad. But you know, let's actually shift to Barbara Waxman. Because Barbara Waxman has a premise about what we could call ourselves, and eloquently encapsulates this as a stage of life. She's an authority on midolescence and a passionate advocate for aging, wisdom, and thriving in midlife and beyond. Her greatest mission is to shift cultural norms around aging by establishing midolescence as a new life stage, just like adolescence was a new life stage about 116 years ago. As one of the only gerontologist coaches in the United States, Barbara founded the Odyssey Group Coaching, LLC, and drawing on 15 years of experience in leadership coaching, Barbara helps game-changing professionals expand their capacity, deliver measurable results, and create impact. She's the author of 3 books examining aging, including one that I love, The Midolescence Manifesto, Igniting the Passion of Midlife. Her work has been featured on CBS This Morning, pretty famous lady we got with us, Marin Magazine, Ariana Huffington's Thrive Global, Wharton Business School, Barbara Brooks, turn off your phone. I know who you are because we can hear you right now. And she's a globetrotter and repotted herself in Italy for a few months, just got back from India, and is very involved in extra food, how women lead, and beyond differences. Welcome to my dear friend, Barbara Waxman. And let's let Barbara just introduce herself.
Wow. I don't know who you were talking about, Chip. I had no idea you were actually going to read all that. I figured you'd just say, I know Barbara. She dances with me down here in Mexico when we lead Conscious Curating Your Life.
She is an MEA guest faculty member par excellence. Tell us about you.
So really, Chip, you said it all. I am thrilled to be here and thrilled to continue to meet other awesome midolescents who are game changers and trying to really shift our cultural narrative about what it means to be in midlife. So what can I tell you about myself? I'm 57. For some reason, I never minded turning 30, 40, 57. Actually, I'm 57 and a half. So yeah, I mean, you really heard a lot about me. Oh, I live in the Bay Area and I'm in the throes of having changed my daughter's wedding plans from May 24th to July 26th. Now we're working on plans C and D. So talking about living in uncertainty. Yeah, I'm there. I'm there.
Hello.
David, take it away.
Yeah. So, wow, Barbara. So before the show, you were telling me, so there's gerontology and there's what's the other Jerry?
Geriatricians.
Geriatrician.
Jerry Springer.
Oh, yeah, my favorite Jerry, right? Absolutely. Let's get a food fight. First of all, what's the difference between those two? I don't know.
Okay, awesome. Great way to start. So a gerontologist, what's so interesting is now the whole field and discussion around demographics and aging is front page news, CBS morning show and the like, right? But no one knows that we actually have people who are experts in adult development. What a concept, because as adults, we continue to develop, but we're used to thinking, oh, child development specialists, okay, and then there are adolescents, and then there are young adults, and then we sort of mainline until we're old, and then that's it. Actually, it is so rich and interesting because every decade, as men and women, we continue to develop. So a gerontologist is someone with an advanced degree in the social, physical, emotional, demographic, all kinds of aspects around aging to become an expert. And a geriatrician is an MD, a doctor who specializes in work with older adults. So
what I'm puzzling about here is that I mean, I know what I was interested in at 18 when I was in college, and it was not this.
And what was her name?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Connect the dots for me here, Barbara. How did you get from A to B?
So it starts actually before I was in college. So, you know, we all have these threads in our life, and the more we understand where those threads came from and where they take us, the more clarity we have about who we are now and how to go forward. The thread of my love for aging and wisdom started when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, when I would go with my dad. Some of the people on this call have heard this story, so I won't go into the whole thing, but I used to go with him to nursing homes where he would volunteer, and he would set me off in the halls to visit with people, figuring it was a safe space. And they thought I was fantastic, and no one told me. I wasn't smart enough, I guess, to realize, oh, be scared of old people. Don't listen to them. So, of course, they thought this little girl coming in, they'd say, what's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this? I got all this positive attention. So fast forward throughout high school, I would volunteer in nursing homes, and in college, while you guys were out partying, I was also out partying. But then when I was studying, I was studying perceptions of the elderly and trying to understand, because I was really curious, why am I such an outlier? And why does everyone else think that once someone is older, they have effectively less wisdom? So I focused on that in university, then worked in the real world for a while. And then in my 20s, went back to school and got 2 masters actually, but one of them was in gerontology. So for all those people who have thought, Barbara Waxman's so smart because she's on this aging thing, I'm not that smart. I did it when I was in my 20s. So I've been in the aging field for over 35 years, from when it was kind of nascent to now where it's really pretty grounded. So that's more or less how I got into it.
Talk a little bit about adolescence and midolescence, because obviously it's almost like they're bookends of adulthood. Like, and adolescence is actually a relatively new word in the history of humankind. And midolescence is a new word that you're popularizing. So what's all that about?
And I want to give you credit too, Chip. You know, you're right behind. Chip and I always kind of talk about words and naming. And so I want to also give you a lot of kudos for integrating midolescence into the vernacular that you use. So here's, in a nutshell, why this is so important. The minute I say to any of you, whether it's thinking about yourself or if anyone on the call has kids, oh, you know, when someone's an adolescent, what happens? You get an immediate hit. Wow, their hormones are changing, their bodies are morphing, their relationships are shifting, and they feel like I'm not a little kid, but I'm not a grown up. So in the early 1900s, a psychologist named Stanley Hall decided, for various political, economic, and physiological and emotional reasons, that it was time to name the stage. So he only named it, people think it's been around forever, but adolescent, like Chip pointed out, was only named in the early 1900s, and it's changed our lives. Think about it. Naming it has changed how we can best handle it. And it's not an adolescent crisis, it's a life stage that's really tough. And we want to help people go through it. So now think about the demographics that everyone here, because you're interested in this issue, has read about, right? The 30 or so years that we've added to our life expectancy by default thinking. We think, oh, okay, I'm going to be old longer. But that's not how we're experiencing those decades. What's happened is they've kind of been plopped in the middle. So at 57, when my kids and I, the entrepreneurs in us, are all at the same stage creating, I'm not feeling like I'm getting ready to retire. And P.S., separate conversation, there's no such thing as retirement as we know it. I'm just getting going. So this stage is difficult because I'm just getting going, but we have these cultural norms that run against it. And here is why I've referred to it as midolescence. It's because, see how many of you, I don't know if we have a show of hands thing, can relate to this. Hormones are changing for men and women both, and we can talk about that. Our bodies are morphing, maybe not in the direction that we'd like this time, but it's a thing. Our relationships are changing, whether it's caregiving, empty nest, divorce, marriage, there's a gamut of things. And we feel like I'm not young. I don't even want to go back there, but I'm not old. So we have this identity shift. So it's like adolescence, midolescence. It's a second adolescence with wisdom. And the reason I refer to it as midolescence is, as a scientist, as a gerontologist, it's a life stage. It's not about boomers. So some of these names that I jotted down from the conversation, I guess, 2 weeks ago, are interesting, but they're defensive names. They're, I'm a midlife matters person. I'm a spirited person. That's a descriptor that's kind of defensive against us seeming old. Now, this is a life stage, and it's born of the demographic gift of the 21st century that we've added these decades. Okay, so I'll stop. But I can keep going.
Good. It's good.
Nice.
David, do you have a question? I have a question, but I'm going to let you go first.
Well, I feel actually there's actually a lot of elements to adolescence to this, right? Like, I never expected to be here to begin with, like doing what I do now at this age. Like, I'm 61. That was just incompatible. So there's a lot of, like, what we deal with at Ageist, we sort of help people around like what should I look like? What should I wear? What should I eat? How should I behave? What should I listen to? Like, it's all sort of like, what am I supposed to look like? I have no idea. Like, I don't have a model for that. And even as an adolescent, there was a lot of that, like, what am I modeling? Am I modeling the Who? Am I modeling the Rolling Stones? Like, what is it? Like, there's.
It's sort of interesting, David. Can I riff on this for a second? When we were adolescents, the thing we didn't want to be was our parents.
Right.
And when we were midolescents, the thing we didn't want to be is our parents.
Right.
I don't want to live my parents' retirement life.
That was horrible.
But Ageist and MEA and many other places and organizations and people are trying to say there's a new path, a pioneering path to how you can age in a way that actually feels just exquisite. So I don't. It's funny, but the part that I'm curious about is, how do men and women go through midolescence differently?
Okay. Let me just comment for a second on what David brought up about what do I want to look like for men and women. It's like, who am I supposed to look like? What am I supposed to be like? One of the really cool things about being a midolescent now that will be different, everyone's going to be a midolescent no matter what generation they're in. It's like adolescence. It's a life stage. So we are the first generation. So we are the trailblazers. So the more we can activate what is true for us and our authenticity, it's going to show up in individual ways, because we are not a monolith, right? We're not one group. We're as kooky as we were when we were younger, and it's going to express itself today in ways like it did then, if that makes sense. So part of what you're feeling is, am I supposed to now, because I'm a middlescent, be a certain way? Nah, keep being you, right? You be you. So that's what I would say to David's good point that he brought up in question. In terms of the difference for men and women, I mean, we could do a whole show on this, but there are, and it's really important to point out, there are significant differences, and I'm going to mention 3. One is something that we hear all the time, that men are allowed to age. And at our age, we know that everything, it has a yin and a yang part. So it's awesome for men, they're allowed to age, and it's not so awesome for women because we're not. At the same time, so that's a thing for middlescents in particular. Although the rising tide among plastic surgery requests in men who are middlescents is skyrocketing. So there's some mixing up and confusion there. But the other part is, men are required culturally to stay in their form. They can age on the outside, but they're not supposed to be more emotional. You know, we give men so much pressure to be in a certain role. And I listened to the conversation a couple of weeks ago with Alex, and I think, is it the Mankind Project that he is a part of? Yep. That I think addresses this very issue. Men are so forced into a role that when they experience andropause, and let me go for just a second through what that is. So we're all used to hearing about menopause for women, which is kind of the reverse of what adolescents go through. Our hormones decrease because we don't need those hormones for child producing anymore, right? So from an evolutionary perspective, that's what happens. And we talk about it because it's a big thing. And it shows up in more obvious ways for women. But men don't get, an easy pass out of this. Men have andropause. Men's testosterone levels, for example, decrease. And there is effect. They get more weight around their bellies. They also emotionally don't have that testosterone. So they're going to change. But do we as a culture allow men to change? No. So when I work as a coach, so, I'm an executive coach and a life coach. So I work with people who are game changers running companies, and I work with people who are at a crossroads, men and women both. The people who come to me, and we meet virtually or in my office, the people who are the first to break down because they have a space to do it are the men. Because women are allowed to break down to one another, men aren't. So the first point has to do with men are allowed to age, and there's a positive part and a negative part to that. The second difference has to do with power. And you'll be surprised at what I'm going to say. Men feel oftentimes like they're losing power. They're not the head of the family the same way. From a financial perspective, women are less dependent on men now in midlife. So that power dynamic is shifting. So as the testosterone decreases and men are feeling less powerful, in fact, women, Crohn's used to be the word, postmenopausal, don't have as much of that need for approval, and our power is increasing. And I don't know if any of the people who are listening, who are women, can feel this, but I hear this all the time. And we need to have a reckoning, men and women being able to talk about this. So that's a second really important point. And the third one, in some way related, I guess, may also be surprising, and that is the divorce rate. The divorce rate for middlescents is pretty high. I don't know what it is right now, but I do know that 60% of the divorces who are initiated by middlescents, people over 40, are initiated by women. So more are requested by women than men. And typically people think about the old school midlife crisis, that men want their way out, but that's not what's happening. So those are 3 differences.
So how does, oh, go ahead, David.
No, is that surprising to you guys?
No, not at all. I mean, one of the things that I tell people, I've got like 10 awesome women I can profile for every guy. That like, in my experience, and I get a lot of pushback about this when I give talks, women in this age group, they just like kick ass. They're the ones, they're starting the businesses, they're running the organizations, they're out front, they're getting stuff done, and the men are just kind of the other way. And it's it just is what it is. I don't know. I mean, I've heard a lot of like smart people tell me why they have different theories of this, but that's the reality. And I had there's a friend of mine who runs the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and I told him about this, and he said, yeah. You know, there are more women going to college. He spouted off all these things. And he said, what's going to happen is we're going to have a moment in about 10 years where there's a corporate board meeting and the board members are going to say, we need some more diversity in here. We got to get some men in here. And, you know, I don't know if that's going to happen, but yeah, I mean, I'm aligned with you on what you're saying.
I will say, for all the men on the call, I don't want people to be like, oh, wow, you know, deflated, because the potential is all there. And that's why we need better collaboration. Men have power. It's just that we need to allow people to activate what their potential is now and feel their feelings. And Chip and I have seen this in the work we've done at the Modern Elder Academy together, right, Chip? I mean, some of the men who we've worked with, it's like they come in one way and they leave the week feeling like free and powerful. So it's more a matter of how do we let people name it and tame it. That's why naming midolescence is so important. And then have the tools to work with themselves for a better future.
How does midolescence relate to midlife crisis? Which is, of course, for those of us who are focused on midlife and saying, oh God, I mean, there were 3 life stages that got introduced in the 20th century: adolescence, midlife, and retirement. And adolescence and retirement got a lot of government support and public policy, but midlife got 0 other than a bad brand. How does midlife crisis relate to midolescence?
So I would say my point of view is there's a myth around the midlife crisis. If we think about this life stage, think about adolescence and all what we expect adolescents to go through, and take that understanding and put it, we're not sure exactly what years. Some kids develop early, some late. Same in midlife. Put that in midlife, that tumult inside. And people need the support to be able to deal with it as best they can. What happens is we don't know what to do with it. We haven't named it. As I said before, we haven't tamed it. And so as a result, when people make a big pivot in their life, we say they're in crisis. Now, they may be going through a really hard time, but here's what we've found. For a lot of times, when we know now that life is long, and that at 57, God willing, there's another 30 years where I'm going to not just be alive, hopefully longer than that, but I'll be actively engaged. I'm thinking, okay, what parts do I want to reconsider? And when people make that pivot and reconsider, it's a crisis for those people they leave behind, or those people who they're not showing up in the same way. They're not putting those people first, perhaps. So yes, there's a red Corvette, call it a crisis, call it like, wow, they're finally doing something awesome for themselves. It's not a crisis, it's a reckoning. It's a midlife reckoning that we should anticipate and not be surprised by.
We did a study for one of our clients on stuff that involved around this. And so we investigated this whole idea of midlife crisis, and it turns out it's non-existent. It was made up. It was made up by an advertising guy in the 70s who talked to like 40 people and came up with this idea. And it's just hooey. Like, I mean, I don't know anybody who like turned 45 and bought the red Corvette and ran off with the stewardess. I mean, I guess that happens.
Dude, you live in LA. Of course you know someone like that.
I actually don't. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's more out. I got to expand my friendships, I guess. I don't know.
Well, let's say this. So I agree. I agree with both of you that midlife crisis is way overplayed. It's like the brand that defines midlife. But there is some evidence in the last 10 to 15 years called the U curve of happiness that actually shows that around 45 to 50, people's level of life satisfaction declines, and it drops. It's not a crisis necessarily. What it is Brene Brown calls it the midlife unraveling. We at MEA call it the midlife edit, the great midlife edit, because you actually get to a place in your life where you've actually accumulated a lot of identities and relationships and roles and responsibilities and mindsets. And it's really time to finally say, oh, this is too much. And I need to just like edit some of it and get clear on like what's important in my life. And I think for a lot of people in midlife, and again, midlife depends on who's defining it. I now define midlife, which Barbara probably will wag her finger at me, as 35 to 75, because I actually think people are feeling in midlife earlier and they're actually working and feeling vital later. I think that, you know, if you're going to go through a 40-year period of midlife, you better not be carrying a lot of extra baggage. And so there's an element of learning how to edit what you have in your life so that you can actually have new space for new things to come into it. I don't know. Barbara, what do you think about that?
I think what you're saying, we have a little bit different terminology, but I call it a midlife reckoning. And I think in order to deal with the reckoning, we edit, we work with it to get clear. The U curve of happiness often coincides for people in the child rearing years when they have teenagers.
Totally.
It's a very fulfilling time. Look, I've got 3 kids and now in their 20s and 30s, but I wouldn't give up having them for anything. But were those teenage years around that U curve dunk the happiest, lightest? Yeah, not so much. It was awesome. I wouldn't change it. It was fulfilling.
No, it gave you meaning, but not happiness.
So if there's a shift that happens when we edit on purpose or circumstantially. So I agree with you. There's a reckoning and we need to work with it. The wagging finger that I won't do, your perspective, but Chip and I always like to wrestle with these nerdy things. So we'll do it. Your perspective on the 35, I think, is very much around, I live in the Bay Area too, when we're working in a world where youth and tech is all, when people are 35, they feel old. But when we look at demographics and just this kind of demographic, for the larger numbers of the population who are not in that kind of industry, that's really, I'm talking about a life stage, and that's somewhat different than what you're talking about. Does that make sense?
I actually, so there's something else I want to add to this. So as part of this big study that we did for this company, part of it had to do with the U curve thing and joy and happiness and how those things are interrelated. And one of the things that we found out was that a lot of the reason for this curve thing about why people get happy has nothing to do with their life circumstances. It's not about paying off the mortgage or the kids are out of the house and stuff. It has to do with, they did a study on the amygdala. And it turns out that as people get older, they get a little better at what they choose to look at. So it turns out we have agency in our lives. We can choose to look at things that make us happy. And as we get older, we learn that's a better idea. When we're younger, we just look at anything, whatever. And so we're able to actually take charge of our sense of joy and happiness merely by what we pay attention to. And we get better at that with time, apparently.
It's emotional modulation. It's EQ can grow with life. IQ doesn't. Oh my God, we could go on for hours about this. Laura, help us. Laura and Anne-Marie, help us. Like, we should open this up to people who have questions so we can see if Barbara has answers.
Yes. Yes. So I've been watching all the questions coming in and taking notes. So I'll pitch out the questions as they came in, Barbara. We had a question from Kara Hugglestone saying, what trends are you seeing now that COVID has occurred with this adolescence group? Like, what has been the impact?
Adolescents, since we are almost 90 million strong just in the United States in terms of who's in this kind of demographic now, and we're all different. Some people handle change and stress better than others. So I think it's really important for people to understand, if you're on this call and you're a adolescent, you shouldn't feel any certain way. If you have that sense, I'd say stop shooting all over yourself, because we're all different in terms of how we're dealing with COVID financially, emotionally, practically, spiritually. So I think my best answer first is, this is a time where we need to be kind to ourselves and to one another, and to look at the opportunity in how, while we're separate, we can also come together to help one another. And what is one thing each one of us can do every day, one small thing to make the world a better place? I'm seeing a hunger for that amongst adolescents, because we are shifting into a stage where we want to feel more meaning.
Beautiful.
We have a question from Sandy Bhatt, who grew up in India. She's been living here now for quite some time, but noticed that you had been on a trip to India recently and wanted to get your perspective on ageism culturally there versus here in the States. And do you have observations?
I was on a leadership journey with an organization just a few months ago. We got back right before the COVID shutdown here and there. I wasn't studying aging. I was studying with a group, and we were looking at how to end forced child marriage. Out of every 4 girls and young women are married before they're 20 against their will. So I was really focused on that. So I like to speak about what I really know. I'm not an expert coming out of that time there in terms of kind of the trends in aging in India right now.
Another question from Pam S. Each age and stage seems to have its accepted roles, but it seems murkier for adolescents. Why is that?
There is such opportunity in the vacuum that exists. It's because the bar is so low for adolescents. There's this unspoken anticipation that we're going to start coasting, that it's like, well, I guess it's downhill from here towards retirement. And by the way, without nerding out too much, why 65? Like, why do we think that's retirement age? It was made up when Social Security was created in 1935 during the Depression to get older workers out of the workforce. Basically, the government said, do we want to pay out? Yeah, I don't think so. So there are reasons they chose 65, which is kind of a joke. But in any case, they chose 65 because life expectancy was closer to 60. So 65 never made sense then, and certainly now when life expectancy has increased. So the expectations aren't based in reality. So I would like for each one of us here today to kind of free ourselves from an expectation around what I'm supposed to be doing now, and look at the opportunity. What is the stage you're in from a health perspective, from an energy perspective, from a financial perspective? and from what you really care about, and put the puzzle pieces together, whether with a coach or by yourself or going to MEA, to really activate your own plan, because there's a vacuum out there. No one's going to tell you exactly what it should look like.
Thank you. We had a question from Laura Zoll when we were talking about the shift in power going from men to women. From men to women. And she stated, women may now have more power, but what about the money? We make less money, we have accrued less money, we have lower investments, and poverty feels more female. Can you address this?
Poverty is more female, and it's more women of color as well. When we're talking about power shifting, power on an individual basis, I was talking about, is shifting. Now we have to activate that power. It is happening in the boardroom. In California, there's a requirement now that there's a woman on every board. Things are shifting. I'm part of How Women Lead, which is an organization, and one of our commitments is to work with women to train them to have more board seats. So become an activist for women to own the power and the contributions that we're able to make. So I didn't want to give you the idea that now the power is equal. We have work to do, but the potential is there. And financially, women have more financial prowess than we have ever had before. So that's the good news. Doesn't mean there's equality. It doesn't mean we're there yet. We have work to do, but it does exist more, which is probably also why the divorces, women who are more financially secure can afford to leave. So some of that is happening. So we're making good strides, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. We had another question. Would love Barbara's perspective on, before the pandemic, those of us in this life stage were already reinventing. And now it seems that more so in this new reality, those of us in our 50s and beyond will be called to share our wisdom in ways we were before, as wisdom becomes more valued and needed. So it seems like there'll be more and more possibilities for our lives. Do you see this as an emerging trend where this reinvention was taking place before, and now has it accelerated? And maybe what are some things we can be doing to accelerate this reinvention?
Well, the thing that comes to mind, Chip is really an expert. Want to make sure you're paying attention. Just kidding. Chip is really an expert on, and that is bringing together millennials and adolescents. So what I'm seeing more and more, and maybe Chip can comment on, is we have wisdom and experience and emotional intelligence and failures, which are actually a good thing. If everyone thinks about what is one of the greatest times in your life where you grew, probably followed a downfall of some kind. And millennials aren't necessarily asking in the ways that we automatically hear for mentorship, but they crave it. Chip, would you agree?
75% of millennials, 3 different studies have shown this now, all coming up with the same data. 75% of millennials would like a mentor. About 2% of millennials actually have a mentor. So what a gap. I mean, speaking of the generation gap, wow, that's an opportunity. What I will say, though, is I actually think that the opportunity goes in both directions. The physics of wisdom doesn't just move from old to young. It actually moves from young to old as well. And if you become a mentor to someone 25 years younger than you, you may learn as much from them as they learn from you.
Absolutely. I always say to clients when I'm working with them, find a wise elder and a wise younger to have on your team. So totally agreed.
Yeah. For me, I use my kids. They're my, it works. They're all in their 20s.
Absolutely.
So a question from Helen Jenkins. Many of us feel great, healthy, vital, and wanting to contribute and give back and share ideas. But how do we convince these younger sections of society and our employers that we are not invisible and that we still have a valuable role to play? So how do we cultivate that in the workplace?
Show up.
Mm.
Show up as your best self.
Yeah.
Don't try to be anyone else, any other age, any other stage. Be open to learning. Like Chip was saying, we have so much to learn from every age group. Be open to sharing and don't try to hide some of the times that you've failed, because frankly, that's the grist that gives us the grit that we and others want. Yeah, I think that's what we need now. I'll say something else. I was on a call this week and excited to get more involved with something, again, Chip's involved with, the longevity pledge, where we're asking, and I shouldn't say we, I just volunteer to help, but I'm excited about it, asking companies to pledge to have an ageless workforce, which doesn't mean that it's quotas per age. Chip, do you want to talk about the longevity pledge?
Yeah, and I think Diane Flynn may be actually on the call, and she's helped to lead this. The premise is, how do we create a workplace where we have an intergenerational collaboration? We have five generations in the workplace for the first time. How do we create sort of an age-neutral workplace? There are some workplaces where it's like all the old people, mostly old men, manage things and run things. Those companies need to figure out, how do you actually tap into the millennials? And then there's tech companies, advertising companies, fashion brands, etc. And it's young people who tend to actually lead those brands or those companies or those industries. And it's, how do they actually tap into some of the wisdom of people 40 and older? And so the premise is like, wow, what if life and work was just an intergenerational potluck? And each generation, we have 5 generations in the workplace for the very first time, brings to the table what they do best.
Powerful.
And funny enough, so only 8% of the companies in the world that do diversity and inclusion work and have an actual diversity inclusion program, only 8% have expanded their D&I program to include age as just as important of a demographic as race, sex, sexual orientation, and ableism, disabled. And so what we know is like, wow, this whole premise that age-friendly workplaces is a really new thing. I want to just bring up Gloria Steinem for a moment. I feel weird, bringing her up because I'm not a woman. But Gloria Steinem has written about this, and she's basically said that it's all about consciousness raising. The women's movement was consciousness raising. And similarly, today, it's about consciousness raising. And ageist is a form of consciousness raising. The MEA is a form of consciousness raising where people actually come together and realize, oh my gosh, I actually have more of a voice, more power, and more to offer society than I thought I had.
I always say that ageism is going to be perhaps the last ism to fall, because not only do we want to fight against it because it's not right to fight against companies and employers who do it, but we're also doing it to ourselves. It's both. It's coming at us from every direction, because when we doubt ourselves, when we're not sure, how do I want to show up? What do I care about? Do I matter anymore? Until we're really clear about how we want to be, what we care about, and how to put that together in a powerful kind of offering and contribution, then we're pointing the arrow of ageism and holding ourselves back. And so many people, successful people on the outside, they'll come to me and they'll say, Barb, everyone thinks I'm really successful and I've done this or accomplished that, but on the inside, I don't feel it. And a lot of it is a mindset that holds them back. So I think that there's an opportunity both to work at the company level, and most companies are run by middlescents. So again, it's having a conversation and opening leaders' mindsets. And I do this with clients. And once I do, it ignites something and it shifts the culture. So we're kind of on the precipice of really creating change. And it's exciting. It's really exciting.
Yay.
Yay.
Laura?
Laura, you're on mute. Okay.
Two more questions, and it'll go quickly. Can you tell us more about this pivot moment and leaving old ideas, people, places, and things behind? Like, that's super hard to do at this stage in the game. It's like, it's a pattern. There's a behavior and everything. It's kind of the path of least resistance. We kind of stick with it because why change it when really there's something burning inside?
So there was a teacher of mine, Frederick Hudson, from the Hudson Institute, who created this really helpful tool called the cycle of renewal. He studied change and realized that change actually has 4 pretty consistent components. And if you understand the 4 in terms of where you are, that pivot becomes a little easier. So in short, the first stage is called go for it. It's where time management is the biggest problem because you're kind of clear. Here's what I care about. Here's what I'm doing. I don't know how to get it all done. We've all kind of been there at some point and probably more than once in our lives, but it never stays. It never exists forever because everything changes. And it shifts to something called the doldrums, which is actually a sailing term that means no wind in your sails. And it's kind of a very dark time. And that pivot from go for it to doldrums is often fast. You lost your job. You lost a relationship. Someone became ill, something like that. Or it's a slow demise where people kind of are just rusted out, burnt out. And actually that's not a time to pivot. It's a time to just be with it, which we are not comfortable with because we want to move out of that stage as fast as possible. So there are times, my first point in responding is, there are times where it's not right to pivot. You just got to be kind of in that place thinking. And then it shifts to cocooning, this time where we're researching. Do I want to make a small pivot? Do I want to make a job change? Or do I want to move across the country, for example? And we research, and then we move into getting ready where we experiment and we try some things out. I'm going to try an adult internship in a field that I've never done before. I had a client who was a lawyer and wanted to be a chef and decided to intern in a kitchen, and it was kind of grueling. And she decided not to go ahead and do that. And it was the best experience because it had been a lifelong dream that she realized, yeah, too many hours on my feet. I don't want to do it. So go through this cycle of renewal. You could probably look it up online and understand, do you want a big pivot or do you want a mini pivot? I think that's the easiest way without working with a coach, that I can kind of give you some tips that you can hopefully use right away.
That was super good. I'm sitting here thinking through the many pivots, some of which I've been through. Last question, what would you like your legacy to be?
That's easy for me. I want my legacy to be that people know that I really care about those people I care about, and about whatever weird reason, helping middlescents name it, tame it, so we can be the best that we can be. And that middlescence will be as common a word as adolescence because it helps people.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Barb. It was a joy having you join us. You had a high standard to live up to with Alex 2 weeks ago, and you lived up to it. And we had a very, very active chat session, people staying, and we had almost no people leaving. So David, tell us about 2 weeks from now.
Well, we have Mr. Paul Hynek. And just a little quick background on Paul. His dad was Dr. Alan Hynek, who was like Mr. UFO, if you're into that kind of thing. Dad's dead, so Paul is like the world's foremost expert on this. But what we like about Paul is he's very deep with the life extension people. And he's I believe he's one of the only 8 people in the world who completed the Stanford TRIM trial. So he reduced his biological age by like 3 or 4 years and he can explain what it did to him. And he has a lot of really interesting thoughts about life extension, why he wants to extend his life, and the moral implications of that. Super smart guy, and he talks to aliens. So what's not to like?
Oh my God. Do you think we'll have some aliens in the chat? That would be fun.
Apparently they don't talk. They just click. They go click, 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 click.
Oh,
I don't know. You have
okay.
to ask him. He'll tell you.
Okay. So just to sum up, thank you, David. To sum up, if you enjoyed today's happy hour and have the means to donate, please donate to Barbara's charity of choice. So each week when we have a guest, we have a charity of choice, and hers is Extra Food, a local nonprofit in Marin County who is rescuing excess fresh food from businesses and immediately delivering it to nonprofits serving Marin's most vulnerable children, adults, and families to address the issues of hunger, wasted food, and the climate crisis. I think that's it. And I think Laura's going to go ahead and put a link to that that nonprofit in the chat. And I think it's 7 o'clock Baja time, 6 o'clock West Coast time. I think it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
Barbara, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank
Yeah.
That was great.
you.
Thanks for everybody showing up. It was a great group. And